Mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Practical Orthodoxy channel. My name is Vanna, and I am one of the co-creators of Practical Orthodoxy, along with the Instagram page that we run. So yeah, this video is definitely different from what we usually produce, which are documentaries and short films. And as this video title says, this will be one of two parts of how I became Orthodox and why I chose Orthodoxy with my religious background growing up. I was not born Orthodox. I was not born Catholic. I was not born Protestant. I was not born evangelical. I was born Theravada Buddhist. My parents are Cambodian immigrants who came during the 80s and the 90s, which makes me a second generation Canadian. And Buddhism is kind of all I really knew as a kid. And I kind of knew a little bit about Christianity, or the realm of Christianities, because growing up, my mom would have Jehovah's Witnesses come over every few days a week to teach us about their beliefs, let us read the New World translations, and kind of just like get studied by them, have Bible studies. Eventually, I got most of my Bible education at a Catholic middle school called St. Patrick's Intermediate School, which is now merged with the high school. And this is where I learned about the basics of the sacraments, the Beatitudes, Lent, Ash Wednesday, meaning of Easter, learning to do the sign of the cross like this during morning prayers. Yeah, so it's just the basics. Everyone else had a head start on me, but I was able to push through and graduate. But this one, I was also kind of diving deep into like conspiracy theories. And keep in mind, like this is important for later. So conspiracy theories, especially regarding the Illuminati, Freemasonry, the occult, what else is there? Hollywood esotericism, satanic worship, and satanic ideology, Satanism. So all of it was kind of wrapped up into the idea of like the one world government taking over the world and, causing the world to end through satanic means. And like, for example, like a conspiracy theory I thought would be true would be like Tupac coming back in 2017. Never happened. Tupac, where you at? Rest in peace to that young man. But yeah, like anything regarding the end of the world, I was super deep and into. That's why like the first book of the Bible I ever read front to back was the book of Revelation. Terrified the crap out of me. No longer terrifies me, but it was one of the books I was hyper fixated on. Fast forward to high school, I was a little bit deeper into Buddhism for like 9th and 10th grade. When I got more exposed to world religions, that's when I took a little bit more of a national pride to being ethnically Cambodian, and also being a Buddhist. But then eventually in 11th grade, I just became agnostic. I just was like, after all these studies, I was like, there's one God, and all these places, claim to be worshiping the same God. All these religions, despite calling each other pagans and damn each other to hell, they somehow believe in this one God. So that's what led me to being agnostic. At the tail end of 11th grade, somebody I knew, became part of the Oneness Pentecostal Church. And they were able to convince me through scaring me, essentially, through the rapture, and also the fact that, they claim to be the one church that Christ established, the Apostolic Pentecostal Church, the UPCI, and that, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit aren't three different gods, but one God in three different modes. And that was convincing enough for me to the point where I, in the end of 2017, went to my first young adult group meeting, or youth group meeting it was. And then eventually I started attending more services and got baptized in that church in 2019. So at that point, I was in the church for about less than 2 years, but I was fully convinced of everything there: the community, the fellowship, the worship, the holiness standards, their theology, and their doctrine. But then 2020 came by, and that was such an important time because what happened in 2020? COVID happened in 2020. But in 2019, I started university. And that was where I met one of my best friends till this day, who's not even Eastern Orthodox, but he's very knowledgeable, very wise, very learned. I would say reformed Christian, Runner. As you follow the Jesus page, you will know who Runner is. He's one of my good homies. He's a rapper from Ottawa, a Christian rapper at that. And we became good friends with him. 2020 is when I really started becoming closer with him. Because 2019, I met him in an African Studies course. That's where I also learned about Oriental Orthodoxy, surprisingly enough. I didn't know Orthodoxy existed in Africa. I didn't know Christianity came to Africa that early. But then 2020, we had a sociology course together, became good friends. Lockdown happened, and we just had engagements and discussions. One of the best discussions ever. Trying to prove who's right. Eventually, 2021 is when I kind of fully deconstructed from the UPCI and from Oneness Pentecostalism and our holiness standards. So that marked about 4 years of being in that church at that point. Um, and then, going on a journey of searching, I identified as Trinitarian evangelical. I didn't really want to become a Pentecostal again, and I didn't really have any desire to. But in 2021, I met a dude named Jacob on Discord, and we're still in contact today. I still consider him a friend, despite us never meeting in person. But he's a real cool dude. Follow each other on Instagram and everything, talk to each other. But he was born and raised in the Oneness Pentecostal Church, UPCI, same denomination that I attended, and he became Reformed Presbyterian. And I was like, "Ooh, this guy knows about something that I don't. Let me listen to him. Maybe there's a reason why he went from UPCI to Reformed Presbyterian." And it convinced me theologically and I would say mentally, I was a Reformed Presbyterian. I held to the Westminster Confession, the Heidelberg Catechism, three forms of the three forms of unity. What else is there? I held to Calvinism, tulip, the Lord's Supper being the spiritual presence of the Lord, and baptismal regeneration, strict monergism. And that was the lens I interpreted all the scripture from and all the beliefs of Christianity from, right? But then in 2022, I was at a CRC church for about a year. I never got formally catechized into the CRC church or baptized, just because the time I was attending, they weren't doing any catechism courses until like the next semester. I went to a Presbyterian church for like 2 weeks, saw that they had a female pastor, and I was like, yeah, I'm out of this. And then read up on what they believe, the PCC churches believe, and I was like, yeah, I'm not touching this church anymore. But that's why I went to CRC. But in the end of 2022, December, I sat down with my pastor and I was like, "Yo, pastor, I've been thinking about becoming Eastern Orthodox. I don't know, just something's no longer convincing me about Protestantism." To my surprise, he actually told me, "Vanna, if that's where you think God's leading you, why don't you try it out?" Blew my mind, because online all I see is Protestants and Orthodox and Catholics bickering each other like dogs and call each other heretics or damn hell. Um, but then 2023 is when I first stepped into church. A little background though. Before I went to that church, it was about 2 weeks after New Year's. I made a prayer. It was like, "Lord, if this is a church for me, let the pastor come to me, the priest come to me, introduce himself, the church, and welcome me and greet me." It's a very simple prayer. I wasn't anything crazy like him, like, being like St. Paisios, knowing my name and my journey. Maybe he did. Maybe my spiritual father has, foresight and stuff like that. I don't know. But that's essentially what happened. I stepped into the church for an Orthodox service in one morning, and he spotted me from a mile away. And clearly, and this is an Orthodox service, so it's a time to be, calm, reverent, silent. He spotted me from a mile away, and he just went, "Hi, my name is Father Nectarios. I'm the priest of this church, the St. Elias, part of, the Antiochian church. Is this your first time visiting?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Okay, well, after the service, after liturgy, we have coffee hour. Feel free to speak to me then. We could formally meet each other and everything." I was like, "Okay, sounds good." That was what really, like, the straw that broke the camel's back of me leaving Protestantism. Because at this point in my life, I was already mentally leaving. I was already kind of mentally checked out for Protestantism. I was inquiring into Orthodoxy, and just stepping into the Orthodox Church, seeing the iconography, seeing the Holy Theotokos, seeing Christ, Christ and his disciples and all these saints in the room. It made me come back to a point in my life where I felt like I was a little kid at the Buddhist temples again, right? So there's a sense of familiarity, but that greeting is what solidified me going, I want to keep coming here. I don't know if I'm Orthodox, but I want to keep coming here. So I eventually had my first meeting with Abu Nectarios, in his office, asking questions about Orthodoxy, asking questions about, the phronema, what is Orthodoxy, all these questions. I think it was like a 1 hour talk, like it went on for a while, but he gave me a little pocket prayer book, and I kept that with me for a while, and I eventually gave it to someone close to me because I felt like they need those prayers, I already have a prayer book, but the pocket prayer book, I think they need that. They're not even Orthodox. I just gave it to them, Well, if that person's still using it to this day. Also gave them an icon of Theotokos, an icon of Christ that was gifted to me. But yeah, and then mid 2023, I became a catechumen. And then 2024, on Lazarus Saturday, I was baptized into the church. Now, why did I choose Orthodoxy over Roman Catholicism? over, remaining Presbyterian over Oriental Orthodoxy? This is a question that I feel like cannot be covered in just one video or two videos. This is something that I have to sit down with somebody for like an hour, just go over it. Roman Catholicism ultimately came down to like, I know this is going to sound like a stupid reason, but historical reasons. The colonial history of the Roman Catholic Church, the way that they, imposed themselves on different nations. Me, I was already kind of becoming anti-Western in a way, and thank God I never became communist. But the way that they went with their colonial powers, endorsing those colonial powers, the forced conversion of indigenous peoples, it left a bad taste in my mouth, especially when I have friends who, are directly affected by that. People who are, descendants of enslaved Africans, or people who come from countries where the Catholics have historically tried to colonize or did colonize and enforce Catholicism on people. I said that doesn't reflect the church itself, but it's a deep institutional problem. The fact that the Catholics just cannot make up their mind on who is a saint or not between the East and the West, like why do they allow Byzantine Catholics to still venerate St. Gregory Palamas? Why do they have the 21 martyrs, the 21 Coptic martyrs, canonized as saints? It just didn't make sense to me. And then also the filioque and absolute divine simplicity. As someone who left oneness Pentecostalism, I was searching for a pure Trinitarian belief. And through my arguments and debates with oneness Pentecostals, one of the things that they always picked at was the filioque and also absolute divine simplicity. Why I never went is because I was a hardcore Deophysite. No matter what, I was going to be a Deophysite. I love my Oriental brothers and sisters in Christ, the Ethiopians, the Coptics, the Syriacs, the Eritreans, the Syro-Malankara. I love you guys. But that was the line I drew. I was like, I am not becoming a Deophysite. I understand that you guys don't hold to Eutychianism, but for me, it just did not make sense to me. Deophysitism made a lot more sense. Why I left Protestantism, I'll leave that for the part 2. But also, just besides theology and theology comparison's sake, the phronema of the Orthodox Church is what I needed. As someone in my life who's, battled mental health problems, mental illnesses, someone who's like, even today, I'm a very anxious and stressed out person. I always felt my life was a clock on a go function. I just never took a break and rested. But Orthodoxy, with its holistic approach, made me realize that, it's okay to really just relax and let God speak to you. I don't mean by a literal audible voice, but let God work in your life. For example, with theosis, the reason why, God became man was so that man might become gods by grace, as St. Athanasius said. But how do you become gods by grace? It's very much doing acts of love. Christ said, if you love me, then keep my commandments. Clothing widows, feeding the poor and hungry, humanitarian work. These are all things that I was already doing and wanted to do more of. But the Orthodox Church just took it so much further into the aspect of uniting with God, becoming one with God, not just in sanctification or justification and salvation, which are 3 different concepts within, Protestantism. It's all one process within Eastern Orthodoxy of theosis. And it's a journey. So now you're working out your salvation for your trembling, but you're also doing it because you love others as much as you love God. You love God so much you want to help others. That's really the crutch of, how to become transformed by God. Besides just taking the sacraments, it's being so loving to the people around you that they can see God through you. Obviously, Protestantism and Roman Catholics can do that. They can be so loving, but they lack the unification and uniting with the uncreated energies of God, so that they may become ontologically changed from the inside. So much so, like if you watch the documentary, even Father Yakub said that we are changing inside by partaking in the Eucharist, the very body and blood of Christ. So yeah, theosis was a major one, and I found it to be it embodies very much of, I think it was St. John Chrysostom, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but St. John Chrysostom said the church is a hospital for the sick. And that's what I found through the Eastern Orthodox Church. The idea of sin, not just a transgression against the law of the Lord, but what causes us to separate from God. Every time we sin, we're saying, I don't need God, right? Every time we sin, we're cutting ourselves away from God. But through the holistic approach of the Orthodox Church, we're being healed. Our nous, the soul, our heart is being cleansed so that we might see what God reflects in us and reflects to others. Like so many aspects I could dive into about it, but I never found such spiritual healing so profound, and it's quite as profound as Eastern Orthodox. So yeah, part 2 of this testimonial will be about why I left Protestantism, what made me not want to go back to Protestantism, and how it pushed me further east. So yeah, stay tuned for that, guys. Peace.